Welcome back, everybody, to our series, Does Evolution Make Sense? This is Module 5, and the topic is, how can we discuss this? We live in an age of rage, and because of that, we need to understand how to interact with people. It's almost as if we have to learn how to have conversations again. And what we're going to cover in this module is a way to do that without offending people. I do have a source that I've used to construct this, and that is a book by Greg Koukl called Tactics. I highly recommend it. Excellent book. We do have a strategy we want to take. We want to avoid a frontal assault. And to do that, you never make a statement when you can ask a question. Why? Because questions are interactive. They invite others to participate. Questions can make headway without you stating your position, whether it's for or against or neutral to what we're talking about. You may just want to explore this with the other person. And so a question is a way to move that ahead. Questions shift the burden of proof to the other person where it belongs if they're making the claim. And questions can keep you in the driver's seat in the sense of you can move the conversation to where you want to go. Questions are also not preaching and can help to expose blind spots to all parties involved. And so we want to use questions. And this is modeled after one of the greatest teachers' teaching techniques, Jesus. Jesus always asked a question in response to a question because the question he was asked was a trick question. There's a question, he says, show me denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? It's a question back for a question. He asked the question, was the baptism of John from heaven or from men when people tried to trap him? Lastly, he says, which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, arise and take up your pallet and walk? So this is just to highlight the teaching technique that Jesus used, which we're going to follow. In terms of our dialogue, we'll look at it as someone will make a statement, and then you can ask a question. And the question is intended to get at what do they really believe? Because somebody may just say something they heard. When you ask them a question, they reflect on what they said, and they say, well, maybe I don't actually believe that. So your question is intended to get them to reflect on it and for you to have a conversation. And so we have several of these. The first one is a statement, surely an all-wise God would not have created such inefficient biological systems like evolution. And you can respond, well, the question is, what do you mean by inefficient? Why would efficiency matter to an eternal and all-powerful being? There's actually a lot to that question, because if God exists, he doesn't care about time. He doesn't care about energy. He doesn't care if things are efficient or inefficient, because guess what? He's all-powerful. He doesn't need to worry about inefficiency. Only us mortals would need to worry about efficiency, because we're in time and we have limited capacities. Second question, or second statement is, ape and human genes are 99% similar, so evolution is true since they're so close. One question you can ask is, well, how is that measurement done and interpreted? And that is actually a very important question. That statement flies around, but there's a lot of subtlety to it. And how the measurements are done and how the data is interpreted is really, really important. My guess, if you were to ask the question, how is that measurement done and interpreted, the person would say, I don't know, which really means they're not qualified to make a judgment on it. Another question you ask is, did you know that humans and mice have a 99% similarity in their protein coding genes region? So you're saying that humans and mice are 99% similar when looking at protein coding genes. So we don't look like mice. We may look like apes, but we certainly don't look like mice. So how is this a good measure? Another question you can ask is, have you read the paper, Complete Sequencing of the Ape Genomes, which estimates 85% similarity? You know, when you say 99% similarity, it sounds really, really, oh, we're almost there, 100%. But when you say 85% similarity, well, now there's 15% difference. And the most recent research, which is what's broader, and looks at a bigger view, is the paper Complete Sequencing of Ape Genomes, which estimates 85% similarity. Statement number 3. Stanley Miller's experiment showed that evolution is possible. Well, have you actually ever reflected on that? Because this question, I think, is an important question. It's, how does an experiment that generates the most basic biological molecules in a lab demonstrate that a cell can turn into an elephant? Right? It's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. Because I can generate some sort of molecules in a lab environment, doesn't mean that a cell can turn into an elephant. And then there's somebody who may say creationism or intelligent design is based on what we don't know. Again, this is probably something they heard on the internet, and you can say, can you explain that to me, because I don't understand the reasoning. Like, what do they think creationism is, or intelligent design? Do they think they throw away science? I'm not saying I'm pro any of these camps. I'm just saying that you want to get the person to think by asking them a question. And you could just ask them, what do you mean by creationism? Or what do you mean by intelligent design? Statement number 5. The biological things we see around us only look designed. They aren't really designed. That's the, right. That is also sort of thrown out there. Oh, it looks like biology is designed, but it's not really designed. Well, you can ask the question, why should I accept the idea that if something looks designed, it is not really designed? You know, if I look at my car and somebody says, oh, that wasn't designed, am I going to believe them or not? My nonsense detector kicks in and says, well, that's nonsense. Common sense is something that's that complex. It requires a designer. And you can ask, well, what scientific experiment and corresponding data led to that conclusion? Why are you asking that question? Well, because what their statement is not a statement about science. It's a philosophical statement. Statement 6. The original material for life that started evolution came from outer space. Well, then you could ask the question, so you're admitting that Earth's early environment was inhospitable to life forming, right? If the material for life had to come from outer space, it couldn't be made on Earth. Why couldn't it be made on Earth? That's a question. And then the next question is actually more obvious. He says, it's why is outer space a better place for life's materials to form than Earth? Statement 7. God didn't design man because junk DNA suggests evolution happened. And the evidence is that junk DNA was passed from monkey to man. Well, you could point out that, did you know that recent research shows that it isn't really junk DNA? The ENCODE project showed that 80% of it has a function. Statement 8. Evolution happened because man has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. Adam and Eve would have required that mankind be less than 5,000 years old. Again, so this is actually a non sequitur, right? Evolution and Adam and Eve are irrelevant. Like, what does Adam and Eve have to do with evolution? Nothing. So the question is, how is man being around for hundreds of thousands of years evidence for a cell becoming an elephant? Right, that's the first question. And we could also, if we want to get into it, we could say that if you believe in Adam and Eve, you would say that human beings are Homo sapiens sapiens, which is less than 100,000 years old. Did you know that 100,000 years is still within the limits of Adam and Eve? So there's some wordplay that's going on here, right? Homo sapiens refers to hominoids, and all kinds of hominoids. But mankind, are Homo sapiens sapiens. So when you hear people talking Homo sapiens, it's too broad a category to have meaning for us. We need Homo sapiens sapiens. The chart which shows chimps becoming apes, becoming men, proves evolution happened. This is one of the things we see, right? Is we see these imaginative drawings that somebody has and they put up, and that's claimed as evidence. So you'd ask, why does an artist's imaginative drawing prove anything? And you could also ask, how many of those ape-like creatures have been proven to be human predecessors, and how many of them have been shown to be frauds? There's quite a bunch of frauds in the apes or proto-men. So you also want to be aware of that. The small amount of gene variation shows that evolution happens. Well, genes have been compared in a misleading way. If recent research shows that a mouse and humans have 99% protein coding gene similarity, then why is this evidence of evolution? Now, also, if genes are only 5% of the DNA, why should 85%, which is the similarity of 5%, show that evolution happens? You're actually talking about like 4% of DNA. Again, the wording and the measurements, the analysis, it's all important to understand this. Statement number 11, microevolution doesn't exist. It's only macroevolution, and all the things you call microevolution are really demonstrations of macroevolution. So you can ask the question, why should I believe that a change in the population of finches with small beaks is the same as a lizard becoming a bird? Category problem. Evolution happens. For example, an ostrich is a bird that lost its ability to fly. Okay, then the question is, why should I believe that when an animal loses the ability to do something it can already do, that this is evidence for evolution? Isn't this the opposite? An evolution of degeneracy? You know, if a bird can fly and then it can't fly, it sounds like you're losing function, not gaining function. So I don't see how that's evidence of evolution. Next statement. No theory is perfect. Evolution is no exception. Well, I would ask the question, isn't that a cliche to stop the progress of science? Isn't the more important question, when should we abandon a theory that hinders science? Statement 14. What is your alternative? Now, this is not what you need to respond to, because they're making a claim about undirected macroevolution. When they ask what's your alternative, you don't have to say anything because you're not making the claim. They are. They need to defend it. And so you could respond with, are you admitting that there's little evidence for undirected macroevolution and a lot of evidence against it? Alternatively, why can't we do science as if directed macroevolution is true? Statement 15. We can't let God in. That's a really good science statement. Well, you could say, if you want to have a good conversation, why not? Who made you God, right? You also might want to point out that the many people who started science were Christians. So what is it about God that would stop the progress of science? Another question is, are you saying that this whole issue is religious in nature? Okay, so hopefully you're getting the feel for this, how to ask the questions, rather than just responding with facts. So that concludes this video. We just want to go through and point out our playlist series. Does evolution make sense? We're just finishing up Module 5, a strategy to discuss this topic. Module 6 is summary, conclusions, and a spicy postscript of the series. That's next. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel before you forget. And also subscribe to our Substack, exblindacademy.substack.com. Thank you.